Rain lashed against the windshield. The wipers worked furiously, battling the downpour. John strained to see through the sheets of water. He was late, already pushing his luck. Then, through the gray mist, he saw a figure, a lone hitchhiker standing by the side of the desolate road.
He wasn't really in the mood for company, but something about the figure's forlorn stance made him stop.
The hitchhiker was young, maybe still a teenager. Their face was pale, almost lost in the shadows of a dark hoodie. Water dripped from the edge of their hood. The hitchhiker didn't speak as they climbed into the car. They just nodded their thanks, their face still hidden in the shadows.
Long way to go?
The hitchhiker just shook their head, their gaze fixed on the road ahead. John tried again.
Where are you headed?
Oakwood Lane.
They breathed, their words barely audible over the roar of the rain. John glanced at the figure in his passenger seat. Their face remained obscured by the shadows of their hood. He couldn't shake off the strange feeling that had settled over him since the hitchhiker had entered the car. The silence, broken only by the rhythmic thudding of the wipers, was unnerving. He tried to focus on the road, on the faint glow of the taillights ahead. The rain continued to fall relentlessly, creating an eerie, almost claustrophobic atmosphere within the car. John stole another look at the hitchhiker, their form hunched, their hands clasped tightly in their lap. He wondered about their story, about their destination on this stormy night. Oakwood Lane. The name echoed in his mind. It sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He decided to break the silence once more.
Do you live on Oakwood Lane?
The hitchhiker didn't answer. They remained motionless, as if they hadn't even heard him. John felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. Something wasn't right. The rain seemed to intensify, the drumming on the roof of the car almost deafening. The hitchhiker remained unsettlingly still. Their silence was more unnerving than any conversation could have been. John tried to ignore the growing sense of dread that filled him. He focused on navigating the winding roads, the headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Oakwood Lane. The name continued to nag at him, a whisper at the edge of his memory. Where had he heard it before? As if reading his thoughts, the hitchhiker suddenly stirred. They leaned forward, their voice a ghostly whisper that seemed to come from somewhere far away.
Turn left at the next corner.
They breathed, their words barely audible over the storm raging outside. John obeyed, his unease growing with each passing mile. The streetlights were scarce now, the houses few and far between. The road ahead was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from his headlights. He was starting to regret his decision to stop. The car lurched as it hit a pothole, jolting John back to the present. He glanced at the hitchhiker, expecting a reaction, a sign of life, but there was nothing. The seat beside him was empty.
He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the wet asphalt. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The back seat was empty. There was no sign of the hitchhiker.
Panic clawed at his throat. He had been so focused on the road, on the storm, that he hadn't even noticed them leave. Had they jumped out? Had he imagined their presence all along? His gaze fell on the dashboard clock. It was almost midnight. He was still on Oakwood Lane, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows across the road. He had a bad feeling about this. John gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He felt a chill run down his spine, despite the muggy heat trapped inside the car. He told himself it was the shock, the adrenaline. But deep down, he knew it was something more.
He continued driving slowly down Oakwood Lane, his eyes scanning the side of the road. It was a desolate stretch, lined with trees that swayed menacingly in the wind. The houses were old, some seemingly abandoned, their windows like vacant eyes staring out at him. Then he saw it, a light flickering faintly in the distance.
As he drove closer, he made out the silhouette of a house. It was a Victorian-era home, its paint peeling, its porch sagging. A single light burned on the porch, casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown lawn. He pulled up in front of the house, his gaze drawn to the address painted on a rusty mailbox. 46 Oakwood Lane. This was it, the hitchhiker's destination. But how? And why? John stepped out of the car, the rain still falling steadily around him. He walked towards the house, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. He hesitated for a moment before raising his hand to knock. The sound of the knocker seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet street. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the faint ticking of an old grandfather clock coming from inside the house.
A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with kind eyes and a weary smile. "Can I help you, son?" she asked, her voice frail but warm.
John took a deep breath, trying to find his voice. "I'm looking for," he began, but he didn't know how to finish the sentence.
The woman's smile faded, replaced by a look of sad understanding.
"You've seen him, haven't you?" she asked softly.
John stared at her, his blood turning to ice. "Seen who?" he whispered, his voice trembling.
The woman stepped back, inviting him inside.
"Come in, son," she said. "Let me tell you about the hitchhiker of Oakwood Lane, the one who took a final ride home many years ago on a night just like this."